Heaven has a price, and I learned it the day I met Lucian Ashford. My name is Gabriel, and I was 19 years old when I walked into the most exclusive art gallery in the city, completely unaware that my entire existence was about to be rewritten. I had come there on a scholarship, part of a program that let kids from my neighborhood experience culture and art that we could never afford. The Ashford Gallery occupied an entire block in downtown Manhattan, all gleaming marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased paintings worth more than most people's houses. I was standing in front of a Monet, lost in the blues and greens of the water lilies, when I felt someone watching me. The presence was overwhelming, suffocating in a way that made my skin prickle and my breathing shallow. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him. Lucian Ashford was the kind of beautiful that seemed almost unfair. He was tall, probably 6'3", with sharp features that looked like they'd been carved from marble by a master sculptor. His eyes were an unsettling shade of silver, like moonlight reflected in still water, and they held the kind of knowledge that comes from living too long and seeing too much. He wore an all-black suit that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, and his dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that seemed both deliberately careless and meticulously planned. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something ageless about him, something that suggested he'd been walking the earth long enough to grow tired of it. "You have good taste," he said, his voice smooth as honey and twice as deadly. "Most people come here for the names on the wall, not for what the art actually means." I felt my face flush. I hadn't expected to be approached, let alone by someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a dark fantasy novel. "I just like how it makes me feel," I said, hating how nervous I sounded. "Like I'm drowning in something beautiful." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you understand why people sold their souls to the devil. "That's the most honest thing I've heard anyone say in this gallery in months. Come with me." It wasn't a request. He didn't wait for me to agree before he turned and started walking deeper into the gallery. Some part of me, the part that had been raised on warnings about strangers and too good to be true scenarios, screamed at me to stay where I was. But the rest of me, the part that had always felt like it didn't belong in the ordinary world, followed him without hesitation. He led me to a private room on the 3rd floor, one that I hadn't even known existed. The door required a key card, and when we stepped inside, I realized I was looking at a collection of paintings that made the rest of the gallery seem like a dollar store. These weren't just expensive. These were impossible. Lost masterpieces, artwork that had been missing for decades, paintings that were supposed to exist only in museum vaults and private collections owned by billionaires. "My name is Lucian Ashford," he said, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "And I have a proposition for you." "How do you know my name isn't Lucian Ashford?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, and the sound echoed through the room like broken glass. "Because I make it a point to know everything about the people I'm interested in. Gabriel Chen, 19 years old, living in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens with your mother. Full scholarship to NYU, studying art history. Your father left when you were 3, and your mother works double shifts at a hospital to keep you fed." The fact that he knew all of this about me should have terrified me. It probably should have sent me running. Instead, I felt a strange kind of inevitability, like I was standing at a crossroads that I'd been walking toward my entire life. "What kind of proposition?" I heard myself asking. He turned to face me, and the silver of his eyes seemed to glow in the soft light of the room. "I'm looking for someone to be my personal assistant. The position comes with a 6-figure salary, a penthouse apartment in the city, and access to anything you could possibly want. In exchange, you would work for me exclusively. Your time, your energy, your loyalty, and eventually, your complete and utter devotion." "That sounds like a job description written by a cult leader," I said. "It probably is," he agreed. "But you're going to say yes anyway, aren't you?" And God help me, he was right. I took the job. It was the worst decision I ever made, and the best. The penthouse was obscene. 40 floors above the city, with views that made you feel like you were standing in the clouds. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, the kind of design that looked beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. My room was larger than my entire apartment in Queens. The bathroom had a soaking tub that overlooked the skyline. Everything was perfect and sterile and completely soulless. My job description was deliberately vague. I was supposed to manage Lucian's schedule, his correspondence, his business dealings. But what I quickly realized was that Lucian Ashford didn't have a traditional business. He dealt in art, yes, but not in the way normal galleries functioned. He acquired pieces that shouldn't be available. He brokered deals between collectors who existed in the shadows. He had connections that reached into every level of society, from government officials to crime bosses, to people so wealthy that money itself became irrelevant. And he did it all with a smile and a grace that suggested he'd been playing this game since before I was born. Within the first week, I realized something was deeply wrong with him. Not in the way that most people are wrong, with their petty cruelties and selfish desires. Lucian was wrong in a fundamental way, like something essential had been carved out of him and replaced with something else. He never slept. I would wake up at 2 in the morning and find him standing on the balcony, staring out at the city with an expression that looked like grief and hunger all mixed together. He didn't eat unless I reminded him. He would go days without speaking unless business required it. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear him in his office, talking to someone on the phone in a language I didn't recognize, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a grave. "What are you?" I asked him one night, after I'd been working for him for about a month. We were in his office, and I was supposed to be organizing his calendar. He was sitting behind his desk, working on something on his laptop, and he looked up at me with an expression that was completely unreadable. "I'm a businessman," he said. "That's not what I meant." I stepped closer to the desk. "There's something wrong with you. Something that doesn't fit into the normal categories of human experience." He set down his laptop and leaned back in his chair, studying me with those impossible silver eyes. "You're perceptive. Most people never notice anything beyond what's in front of them." "What are you?" I asked again. He smiled, and this time it was sad. "I'm someone who made a deal a very long time ago, and the price I paid was everything that made me human. I can't feel pleasure, Gabriel. I can't feel pain. I can't feel love or hope or fear or any of the things that make life worth living. I can only feel hunger." "Hunger for what?" He stood up and walked toward me, and I understood with a sudden, terrible clarity that I was standing very close to something dangerous. For connection. For someone to see me as something other than a monster. For someone to stay, even after they realize what I am. He reached out and touched my face, his hand ice cold against my skin. "I think you might be that person." By the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late. Lucian had wrapped himself around every part of my life. My mother was suddenly able to afford better medical care. My college tuition was paid in full, with enough left over to set up a trust fund. My apartment in Queens was replaced with a room in his penthouse. My friends, the few that I had, were gently but firmly encouraged to distance themselves from me until I was completely, utterly alone except for him. And the worst part was that I didn't even realize it was happening until I was already drowning. I fell in love with him somewhere between the 3rd month and the 4th. I'm still not entirely sure when it happened. It might have been the night he took me to his private collection and showed me paintings that shouldn't exist, artwork so beautiful that they brought tears to my eyes. It might have been the morning I found him asleep on the couch, looking almost peaceful, almost human, and realized that this was probably the most vulnerable I'd ever seen him. It might have been the first time he let me touch him, his entire body going rigid under my hands like he wasn't entirely sure what to do with kindness. Love, I learned, is a lot like drowning. It starts out feeling like flying, and by the time you realize you can't breathe, it's far too late to save yourself. The first time Lucian kissed me, it felt like signing a contract with the devil. We were in his office, and I was supposed to be working. I was organizing some documents, standing at his desk, when he reached out and grabbed my wrist. His touch was gentle but firm, the touch of someone who had learned control through centuries of practice. "Stop," he whispered. I turned to look at him, and his silver eyes were dark, almost black, filled with something that looked almost like desperation. "Why?" I asked, knowing exactly why, feeling the charge in the air between us like electricity. "Because if you don't, I'm going to do something that we both know you're going to regret." "Maybe I want to regret it," I said. He pulled me toward him, and his lips found mine with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before in 1,000 different lifetimes. The kiss was cold and hot at the same time, gentle and consuming. It tasted like hunger and loneliness, and the kind of darkness that exists at the edges of the world. I could feel something shifting inside me with every second his mouth was on mine, like he was drawing something vital out of my chest and replacing it with something darker. When he finally pulled back, he looked at me with an expression that might have been fear, if someone like him could feel fear. "You should leave," he said. "Right now, get your things and go back to Queens. Tell your mother you changed your mind about the job. Disappear from my life completely." "No," I said, "I'm not going anywhere." "You don't understand what you're agreeing to," he whispered. "I will destroy you, Gabriel. It's what I do. I take beautiful things and I corrupt them. I take good people and I turn them into something broken. It's inevitable." "Then I guess I'm going to be broken," I said. And I kissed him again. The next few weeks were a descent into a kind of madness that I didn't know existed. Lucian became increasingly possessive, increasingly obsessed with controlling every aspect of my life. He didn't want me leaving the penthouse without him. He didn't want me talking to anyone except him. He monitored my phone, my emails, my conversations. He would wake me up in the middle of the night just to make sure I was still there. Like he was terrified that I would disappear the moment he wasn't watching. And I let him. I accepted it as the price of his affection, the cost of being loved by something that couldn't actually feel love. But I should have realized that love was never what this was. What Lucian felt for me was possession, pure and simple. I was his, in the same way that the paintings in his collection were his. I was something beautiful that he'd acquired, and he had no intention of ever letting me go. The breaking point came on a night in October. I'd made the mistake of trying to contact my mother without Lucian's permission. She had called the penthouse, worried about me, and I'd actually answered the phone. I'd talked to her for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and told her that I was fine and that I would visit soon. I thought nothing of it. But Lucian found out. He always found out. I was in my room when he came in, and I could see immediately that something had shifted in him. The carefully maintained mask of civility had slipped, and what was underneath was raw and furious and absolutely terrifying. "You called your mother," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, she was worried about me. I specifically told you that you were not to contact anyone without my permission." He stepped closer, and I felt my heart start racing in a way that had nothing to do with attraction, and everything to do with primal fear. "I'm allowed to talk to my mother, Lucian." "No," he said quietly. "You're not. You belong to me. Every moment of your time, every word that comes out of your mouth, every breath you take. It's all mine, and I don't share." He grabbed my face with surprising gentleness, forcing me to look into his silver eyes. "Do you understand what I am, Gabriel? Do you really understand? I'm not human. I haven't been human for so long that I can barely remember what it felt like. And the things I do, the things I want to do to you, they're not motivated by love. They're motivated by possession and hunger and the need to own something so completely that it stops existing as a step becomes part of me." "Let go of me," I whispered. "No," he said, "I don't think I will. I think I'm going to keep you here, and I'm going to remake you into exactly what I need you to be. And by the time I'm done, you won't even remember your mother's name." He released me, but the damage was already done. Something in me had broken, some fundamental part of me that had believed despite all the evidence that Lucian could change. That love, even twisted and poisoned love, could be enough to save him. I was wrong. That night I made a plan. I had access to Lucian's credit cards, his bank accounts, his passwords. I started transferring money to a secret account that he didn't know about. I made copies of his documents, his business records, his connections. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do with this information, but I knew that I needed an exit strategy. And I needed it before Lucian decided that I was no longer useful to him. The next morning I told him that I wanted to leave. I told him that I'd made a mistake, that I couldn't do this anymore, that I needed to go back to my normal life. I expected him to fight me on it. I expected him to rage and threaten and use every manipulation tactic he could think of to keep me. Instead he just smiled. "Go," he said. "I've already grown tired of you anyway. You're not as interesting as I thought you'd be. You're too weak, too human, too easily broken. I was hoping for someone with more substance, but you'll do as a lesson." The rejection hit harder than any physical blow could have. And I realized in that moment that I'd been willing to sacrifice everything for someone who saw me as nothing more than a temporary entertainment. I left that day with nothing but the clothes on my back and the copies of his documents. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out what happens when you sell your soul. To someone who never intended to keep their end of the bargain. 3 months after I left the penthouse, I was living in a small studio apartment in a neighborhood that made Queens look like the Upper East Side. The money I'd transferred was enough to keep me alive for about 6 months if I was careful. But more importantly, I had Lucian's documents, and I knew enough about his business to understand that he wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal, operating in the shadows, doing things that the law would be very interested in knowing about. I had leverage, and I was starting to understand how to use it. The first lawyer I talked to told me that what I had was dynamite. Lucian Ashford's entire operation could be dismantled with the information I possessed. Illegal art trafficking, money laundering, connections to organized crime, potentially even murders. The lawyer wanted to go to the FBI immediately. But something stopped me, some part of me that was still tangled up in the web he'd woven around my heart. Instead I called him. I made it sound casual, like I was just reaching out to say hello, like I didn't have a folder full of documents that could destroy him sitting on my laptop. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Manhattan, one of those trendy places where people like him went to pretend they were normal. He looked exactly the same when he walked in, beautiful and terrible and ageless. He sat down across from me like we were old friends catching up, and he ordered an espresso that he had no intention of drinking. "You look well," he said, "for someone who's been living in squalor." "I have a proposition for you," I said, ignoring the jab. "I have information about your business. Enough to destroy you, enough to send you to prison for the rest of your natural life, assuming that the law applies to someone like you." He laughed, and the sound made everyone in the coffee shop turn to look at us. "You think I don't know that you have my documents? Gabriel, I've known everything you've been doing since the moment you left. I let you take them. I let you plan your little revenge. Because I wanted to see what you would do with it." "What do you want?" I asked. "A choice," he said. "You can go to the FBI right now, hand over everything you have and watch me disappear. I have resources that you can't even imagine, Gabriel. I'll be gone before the investigation even starts. Or you can come back to me and I'll give you what you really want." "What's that?" "Love," he said simply. "Real love, not the twisted possessive thing I was capable of before. I've had 3 months to think about what you meant to me, and I've realized that everything I said to you was wrong. You're not weak. You're the strongest person I've ever met, because you survived me. You left me. You built a life without me, and now you have me at your mercy. And you're still sitting here, still talking to me, still capable of feeling something for the monster who tried to break you." I stared at him across the table, and I tried to figure out if he was lying, if this was just another manipulation, another way of getting me back under his control. But I couldn't tell. The silver of his eyes was softer than I remembered, almost human. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" I asked. "You don't," he said. "That's the point of love, Gabriel. It's the greatest risk you can take. You either trust me completely, or you don't trust me at all. There's no middle ground." I thought about the months I'd spent planning my escape, the months I'd spent trying to convince myself that I didn't love him, that what I felt was nothing more than trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome. But the truth was more complicated than that. Yes, he'd hurt me. Yes, he'd tried to control me. Yes, everything about our relationship had been toxic and twisted and fundamentally wrong. But somewhere in all of that, beneath all of the manipulation and possession, there had been moments of genuine connection. Moments when he'd let his guard down and shown me the loneliness at his core. The desperate hunger for someone to see him as something other than a monster. "If I do this," I said slowly, "things have to change. You can't control me. You can't monitor me or isolate me or threaten me. You have to let me be my own person, completely separate from you." "I don't know if I can do that," he said honestly, "but I'm willing to try. For you, I'm willing to try." I took the documents and I burned them, all of them. I sat in my apartment and I fed them into a shredder one by one, destroying 3 months of work, destroying my insurance policy, destroying the one thing that gave me power over him. And when the last document was shredded, I called him and told him I was coming back. The penthouse was exactly as I'd left it. My room was still there, untouched, waiting for me like I'd never left. But things were different this time. Lucian gave me access to his business dealings, explained his operations to me, trusted me with information that he'd never shared with anyone before. He tried in his own way to be human. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when I could see the hunger in his eyes, when I could feel the edges of his control trying to reassert themselves. but he always pulled back. He always chose me over his nature. And slowly, over months and then years, something shifted. The coldness in his eyes began to warm. He started sleeping, real sleep, not just standing on balconies staring into the darkness. He started eating not because I reminded him, but because he actually wanted to. He started laughing, actually laughing, at jokes and absurdities and the ridiculous moments of life that he'd been missing for so long. I realized that I hadn't sold my soul after all. What I'd done was far more complicated and far more dangerous. I'd saved him, not the way you save someone from drowning, pulling them out and expecting them to be grateful, but the way you save someone by staying with them while they drown, by holding their hand as they go down, by refusing to let them face the darkness alone. And in saving him, I'd saved myself too. Because love, real love, the kind that survives darkness and possession and the worst parts of human nature, is the most powerful force in the world. It's stronger than money, stronger than power, stronger than the desperate hunger of something that stopped being human a very long time ago. We're still in the penthouse. Sometimes I look out at the city lights and I think about the 19-year-old kid who walked into that gallery and saw a painting he didn't understand. I think about how one conversation with the wrong person at the right moment can change the entire trajectory of your life. I think about how close I came to destroying him, and how much closer I came to losing myself completely. But mostly I think about the man who stands beside me now, the one who still has silver eyes but also has warmth and laughter, and the capacity to feel. I think about how we're both angels and demons, light and darkness, good and evil, all at the same time. And I think about how sometimes the only way to save a monster is to become a little bit monstrous yourself. The price of heaven, I learned, isn't paid in currency or years or sacrifices made to distant gods. It's paid in the willingness to stand in the darkness with someone you love, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, love is enough to bring you both back into the light.